Certain ancient prophetic texts are engineered to operate flawlessly across multiple, separated historical timelines, functioning as immediate geopolitical data and long-term theological blueprints. We can see this mechanical precision at work in the text of Isaiah chapter 9, specifically verses 3 through 5. To read this passage accurately, we have to structurally deconstruct how these three sentences predict two completely distinct historical fulfillments. The primary immediate fulfillment is physical. It plots the geopolitical liberation of the Jewish people from Babylonian captivity, a process that began in 538 BC. The secondary fulfillment is theological. It predicts a spiritual liberation occurring 6 centuries later in 1st century Judea, under heavy occupation of the Roman Empire. We analyze this overlap through a framework called Typological Deliverance. This framework demonstrates how the physical events of 538 BC serve as the prototype, mapping exactly onto the spiritual reality of the 1st century AD. By plotting verses 3, 4, and 5 simultaneously across both parallel tracks, a distinct verse-by-verse methodology emerges. Interpreting the spiritual piece of the 1st century requires first examining the physical mechanics of the 6th century BC. Isaiah 9 verse 3 begins with an agricultural and economic indicator. Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. The reference to a multiplied nation establishes the baseline promise made to Abraham, a divine commitment to the vast multiplication of his seed. In the 538 BC timeline, the physical fulfillment arrived when Cyrus conquered Babylon. By 536 BC, the captive Jews were returning to Judah. The text links this specific historical repatriation to the metaphor of harvest joy, the intense relief of securing survival after a long period of labor and scarcity. Furthermore, dividing the spoil is a strict ancient Near Eastern concept. It denotes the direct economic reward and redistribution of wealth that occurs after a population successfully survives a major geopolitical conflict. When we transition to the 1st century AD timeline, we encounter a textual anomaly. The marginal reading in the original Hebrew, confirmed by many ancient versions, adjusts the text to read, "Thou hast increased their joy." In the 1st century, this increased joy maps directly to the aggressive, widespread spiritual multiplication of the early Christian church, expanding rapidly across the Mediterranean. Contrast this spiritual expansion with the literal physical spoils extracted by empires during the same era. Roman legions dismantled Jerusalem and carried off its most sacred wealth as traditional war loot. The physical removal of these temple artifacts effectively decentralized the religion. It ironically forced the joy of the believers to transition from a physical, static location in Jerusalem into a highly mobile, widespread spiritual movement. Verse 3 identifies a shift in the nature of divine victory. The spoils of this era manifest as the rapid demographic expansion of a theological movement. Verse 4 introduces the exact mechanics of the deliverance. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. To ground this prophetic metaphor, we have to deconstruct the physical mechanics of an agricultural yoke. This is a tool designed to force inescapable submission. It locks the subject into the absolute direction of a master. Isaiah uses this heavy wooden framework to map directly to Babylon's total subjugation of Judah. In 538 BC, the physical yoke breaker arrived in the form of Cyrus the Great of Persia. Historical artifacts confirm Cyrus utilized a highly unique foreign policy. He actively repatriated captive populations and restored their sanctuaries without forcing them to fight for their freedom. The tactical reality of this liberation is outlined in Daniel chapter 5. Darius and the Median army infiltrated Babylon by damming up the city's massive waterways, allowing them to march directly under the walls. The capital fell with little resistance, resulting in a nearly bloodless conquest where Judah was freed without ever taking up arms. Isaiah explicitly links this to the day of Midian. This references the historical events of Judges chapter 7, where Israel was delivered from Midianite oppression by Gideon. Gideon's victory was accomplished using a tiny, intentionally limited force. This established a strict theological axiom: legitimate divine deliverance must occur without the delivered showing military prowess. The design prevents the populace from claiming they saved themselves by their own hands. Pivoting the timeline to the 1st century AD requires asking a structural question. Who held the rod of the oppressor over the Jewish people spiritually? The theological oppressors of the era were the scribes, Sadducees, and Pharisees. They had constructed a vast intricate network of added laws and strict traditions. This highly rigid legalism functioned identically to an inescapable wooden yoke resting upon the shoulders of the populace. Christ executed a precise theological countermaneuver in Matthew chapter 11, stating, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." He offered to completely replace their heavy legalistic burden with his gospel. Accepting this new, lighter yoke represented a transfer of jurisdiction, moving the individual from captivity into peace. Whether breaking the geopolitical grip of the Babylonian Empire or lifting the strictures of Pharisaic law, true typological liberation always involves an external, divine intervention, shattering a human yoke. Verse 5 draws a stark dichotomy between human warfare and divine intervention. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. The phrase garments rolled in blood accurately describes the chaotic, brutal reality of ancient hand-to-hand infantry combat. It is human-driven slaughter. However, burning and fuel of fire references a specific ancient Near Eastern military custom. After a battle, victors would strip the vanquished dead, pile up their armor, weapons, and chariots, and ceremonially burn them to ashes. This establishes a recurring scriptural pattern. In Psalms 46 and Ezekiel 39, God explicitly mandates the burning of the enemy's weapons, permanently destroying their capacity to make war. We see this pattern applied to the swift, catastrophic fall of the Babylonian army to Persia in 538 BC. The destruction of the Babylonian Empire was so complete and sudden that it bypassed the drawn-out attrition of standard siege warfare. The geopolitical collapse acted like a sudden, consuming fire. In the 1st century AD, the application of the confused noise of battle takes on a highly specific geopolitical function. The 1st century was characterized by relentless military friction. The Roman legions were engaged in a violent suppressive war against Jewish factions, while Rome itself was embroiled in internal civil wars. The theological mechanism for this era is articulated in 1 Nephi 22:17, which states the righteous are preserved by divine power, even if the fullness of wrath, the destruction of their enemies by fire, must come. This destruction created a paradoxical shield for the early Christian church. The confused noise of the Great Jewish Revolt and Roman internal strife consumed the resources of both the Jewish authorities and the Roman state. Because these oppressors were focused on destroying one another, their capacity to systematically persecute emergent Christian communities was neutralized. This intense geopolitical conflict served as the fire that burned away the existing structures of opposition. The resulting vacuum provided the church with a critical window of safety to expand its membership and solidify its foundation. Isaiah's fire, therefore, fulfills a dual role. It acts as the fuel that consumes the old order, while simultaneously insulating the new spiritual movement from interference. Isaiah 9 verses 3 through 5 map an exact structural bridge across a 600-year historical gap. On the physical axis, we have Cyrus the Great, a dammed river, and the literal end of the Babylonian exile. On the spiritual axis, we have Christ, the Pharisees, and the end of heavy legalistic exile. Both eras are united by the Day of Midian, deliverance engineered entirely without the military prowess of the oppressed. The parameters for liberation are fixed. Whether breaking empires or breaking traditions, the subject is freed through external intervention, never by their own hand. Ancient prophetic texts operate as highly engineered architectural blueprints. Understanding the full weight of these ancient scriptures requires looking backward at the cold mechanics of physical history. Only then can we accurately map the reality of ultimate theological deliverance.